Hi, welcome back. This is Andrew Sears, and in this lesson on our Introduction to Management and Leadership course, I'm going to talk about the DiSC personality profile, how that you can use that to map to 8 dimensions of leadership, and then I'm also going to relate that to the competing values framework and how all of those relate to management versus leadership. So many of you have probably heard about the DiSC personality profile. It's one of the most widely used personality profiles out there. It basically identifies how strong you are across 4 different dimensions: dominance, influence, conscientiousness, and steadiness. And then you can go across the axes. So, this axis is, much more skeptical. This axis is much more people focused. This one is focused on getting things done and, thoughtful. And you can kind of read the details of what it means by conscientiousness, dominance, influence. And you can go through, summaries on our, in other course materials for that. Now, there's a book that was written called The 8 Dimensions of Leadership that uses the 4 dimensions of DiSC to map to 8 different dimensions of leadership. And you can see the 8 different dimensions that map. And what we're going to have you do is take a free test on the website Truity, so you can get your DiSC profile. And usually the way it works, Truity doesn't give you the 2-letter definition, but what it'll do is it'll map how big each of the dimensions are for you. So in this example, you see the biggest one's D and then C. So that would be the result is DiSC. And then in the next slide, you can see how that maps. So a DiSC is resolute, and some of these other ones you can see, how they map. So part of what you're going to do is you're going to take your test. Then you're going to see, where does this map? For a lot of people, you may feel like you kind of map across multiple dimensions. Now, real quick summary. So the 8 dimensions are pioneering, energizing, affirming, inclusive, humble, deliberate, resolute, and commanding. If you'd like, you can kind of pause and read through this. We have summaries. But one of the key questions, related to this course, because this course is half focused on management and half focused on leadership, with the emphasis that there's a big overlap between those two. The 2 probably most popular books out there, The First-Time Manager and the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, that we're using in this course. And then, with the 8 dimensions of leadership, there's kind of a question of which of these are management dimensions and which of these are leadership dimensions. And there's not a super easy way to map this, but I can say that, the more you are over on the deliberate, that's definitely on the management side. And then the leadership dimensions, the more you're over here, it's leadership focused dimensions. And some of these other ones might be a little bit of both. Being humble is going to help you in leadership, but it might also help you some in management. And same thing with commanding. So that's one way of thinking about, across the 8 dimensions of leadership, management versus leadership. The other thing is, in many of our courses, we use the competing values framework. And we also use that as a competency map on the workplace behavioral profile. And there you have these different skills. And it's worth noting that in the competing values framework, this bottom half, is management, and the top half is really leadership. And the workplace behavioral profile, and I'm just going to go over this really quick, because if you took our Org 101 course, you did a deep dive on this, and you did a profile. And you have these different management competencies. What's important is just to recognize that these competencies up here often are more in the leadership domain. These competencies down here are often more in the management domain. Looking at this way, there's kind of a question of, how does the 8 dimensions of leadership map to the competing values framework? Really, 4 of the dimensions of the 8 dimensions of leadership are really on the collaborate: energizing, affirming, inclusive, and humble. And then resolute is especially on the compete. Deliberate, especially on the control. Pioneering is, especially on the create. And then commanding is a little hard to place, because you could be commanding across any of the quadrants, probably not as much on the collaborate quadrant because it's kind of the opposite of that. It's probably most dominant in the compete quadrant, but you could be a commanding, control quadrant person or a commanding create quadrant person. So with all that, one of the things we're going to have you do in this is you're going to take this 8 dimensions of leadership and you're going to look at, you're going to have your strong dimension, and you're going to have, some of the ones that are weaker. And part of how I use this for myself was, I saw what I was strong in, and then I saw areas that I needed to grow in. And I looked at those competencies and I was like, how do I grow in those competencies? And what I did with myself is I looked for books that covered those topics, how to be a good listener, for example, and just have that at the front of my mind and trying to, work on those skills. And the other thing is I found people who are good at those things, and I asked them questions. I had them mentor me. So part of what we're going to do is have you, let's say that you are, your strength is in pioneering, but you're not very good at the deliberate. So we're going to have you, work on your strengths. And some of you may feel like, okay, my top 2 strengths are pioneering and energizing, but I'm not very good at deliberate and resolute. So what you're going to do is you're going to look at, how do you develop those strengths? And, one of the principles we say is you major in your strengths and you minor in your weaknesses, unless you're at a stage of your life where you need to flip that. So, I would say I started off major in my strengths and minor in my weaknesses. And as I got older, I kind of flipped that because my weaknesses were actually, limiting me more than my strengths. So that's what we're going to have you do is to create a plan for that. But part of that is thinking about also just how does that fit with City Vision courses. So if you take the competing values framework and then you take some of these 8 dimensions. So a lot of the 8 dimensions, these 4 dimensions that map to competing values framework, they're going to relate. So say you need to develop more of your ministry competencies, or you need to develop, energizing, affirming, inclusive, and humble. You can look at some of our courses that are going to help you develop that. So cross-cultural management might help you develop that, leadership in under-resourced communities. Some of these other courses, resolute and commanding, executive leadership might be good for that, and deliberate. A lot of that's just paying attention to details. So learning these detail-oriented skills, and then pioneering. So you could pick courses as a part of your plan. Now, this is our overall course map, and this is the same thing as competing values frameworks, just showing it a little bit different. But if you go to each of our degree pages, and for each of you, you're going to have different degrees. But in all of our management and ministry degree pages, we have a section that's called the competency map. And what you need to do is you need to click on the competency map section of the degree plan, and it's going to show you something like this. And what you can do is you can see what the courses are that relate to the competencies that you need to develop. Now, I realize I'm going over this. This is really intended to be a quick survey. And as you go through this, and you can say, okay, which of these courses might help me develop these skills, and you can try to identify the different courses that might help you develop that. So hopefully this is helpful. And again, if you have any questions, please ask your faculty member. Thanks.